I would like to introduce our first speaker. It's Georgeen Theodore of Interboro from New York. Interboro is an interesting office because it's a little bit at the crossroads of architecture, urban design, town planning, public space design. It's a little bit difficult to grasp and that's what makes them so special. They started their practice in a time where in the US people were basically sleeping with CNC milling stations, right? Architects were having sex with these machines. They were so excited to make all kinds of objects digitally and basically stayed in the space of academia or their office. And very few people actually thought about, okay, what are we going to do with urban space? What happens to public space right now when private corporations take over more and more that kind of space? Is there anything that we can do to make people more confident to actually appropriate public space? What could be the programs? Who actually programs public space? All those questions were coming up in their projects, and they did a number of really beautiful interventions where they gave an idea that public space does not need to be an abstract kind of symbol for something we have lost, but can actually be something of our daily life. Georgeen, I would like to give the microphone over to Georgeen Theodore.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Andreas, for that wonderful introduction. I don't think CNC milling machine sex and Interboro have ever been put together in an introduction before, but it's wonderful to have that. And it's wonderful to be here at this particular event. Thank you to all of the organizers for this invitation. So in addition to being a principal at Interboro, I'm also a professor at New Jersey Institute of Technology, where I direct the Master of Infrastructure Planning program, which is a program focused on cities and urbanization. Probably the shortest, also the first and the shortest of all the speakers today. So I'd like to address today's theme. I'm going to look at my time here. I'd like to address today's theme by presenting a group of public space projects my partners, Tobias Ambors and Daniel Dioka, and I have developed in the New York context. We have over the years and through the development of a range of projects tried to address the critical questions of public space. What is it anyway? How is it used? Who gets to use it and why? And we're particularly interested in questions of inclusion, of equity and accessibility. And we've sought to question the role of the designer in all of this and perhaps even stake out a slightly expanded role for her in the overall process. This photo is actually not one of our projects, but I think it really captures the spirit of what we're doing, which comes out of the specificity of the place we work, New York City. This silver vertical thing you see here is one of New York City's new Wi-Fi kiosks. These kiosks have really been in the news a lot recently. And they're meant to allow people to consult maps, maybe check the weather, or charge their phones. And here in this crappy photo, you see that someone has dragged over this pink upholstered chair and parked himself down and plugged himself in to enjoy this luxury of free Wi-Fi. And it's the kind of action that's really specific to the circumstances in New York City right now. We have this hyper heated up economy. There are a lot of resources, but those goodies are maybe not accessible to everyone. I would say that most people, they want the common luxuries. And what you see here is someone really working between the cracks of the system to enjoy them. And so it's an individual actor appropriating and being resourceful by working with what's there, and in doing so, changing its meaning and use. So this is something that we have always been very, very interested in, how people use and transform places every day. And I have to thank Andres for really setting this up perfectly. But how the meaning and sometimes the form of a place or a building is changed over time by people or forces that are typically beyond the control of the architect. So sometimes we work in an almost journalistic way to document and to visualize these everyday transformations. And sometimes we use what we find as a kind of raw material for our design work. And we have found that these transformations that we visualize and that we've found, they very often give us hints about how to make a place better. And in our design work, we strive to create places that are ambiguous enough to be appropriated and transformed in many different ways. So we strive to create what Barry Bergdahl once called about our work public rec rooms, and I think he really means that in a very positive way. These are places that are informal enough for people to casually use and make their own. So our projects are really, they're really dealing with appropriation, reuse, and reinterpretation by others. And the question who these others are and what they can do with a project often ties into larger spatial, economic, and social dynamics of a place. So in all of our work, we're really concerned with the process of developing the project. You could say the before, during, and after design. At the same time, we're really interested in the place itself. You know, we really strive to make the public places we design interesting and engaging and fun. And we're working to create spaces of interaction. And you could say, like in the spirit of Iris Marion Young, and I'm going to quote here, spaces that are heterogeneous, plural, and playful places where people can witness and appreciate diverse cultural expressions that they do not share and do not fully understand. So before I sort of go into this in more detail, perhaps a few words about our office. I don't have to say much because Andreas has already done such a wonderful job doing that. But we are a New York City-based group of architects, designers, urban planners, and we are working in this transdisciplinary way, but we're working on both buildings and places. And in our work, we actually develop a lot of exhibits and publications, and we use the tools of architectural design, such as maps and models, to visualize urban issues and to project possible futures. So many of these projects deal with the transformation of a place by their users. So we're not only interested in buildings and cities, but also the many things that people do with buildings and cities, how they transform them, adjust them to their needs, and how they thereby sometimes endow them with totally new meaning. One quick example, this is our book, The Arsenal of Exclusion and Inclusion, which is going to be released next month by ACTAR. It's an encyclopedia of 157 tools, or what we call weapons. They're used by architects and planners, policymakers, developers, real estate brokers, activists, and other urban actors to either restrict access to space or increase access to space. This is going to be on the cover, and actually you can find all 157 tools embedded in that illustration. So again, in this case, even though this is a written work, we're trying to shed light on and make visible the forces that are shaping the physical environment through texts, illustrations, and photographs. And here you can see one of those entries, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which we don't have time to talk about today, but anyway, it's jam-packed with goodies like that. We also do a lot of city and regional planning. And currently, we're developing a regional plan for the South Shore of Long Island, which you can see here. And we're also developing a comprehensive plan for the city of Cambridge. Some of you may know it's just outside of Boston. It's a big university town, home of universities such as Harvard and MIT. And so we're doing the comprehensive plan there. But part of the reason why these cities and governments hire us as planners is that I think that we're very good at developing new creative tools of communication and participation, and using design as a way to start a conversation about planning with actors that are not typically involved in the planning process. So participation, at least in the United States context, which is often a requirement, but is really seen as this kind of chore by professionals, in our eyes, we try to use it as a source of inspiration and creativity. So in this image here, you can see that there's this table. This is actually something that we designed and built. It actually has a map on the surface of the table and then has tiles with a physical model on top of it. The chairs are actually the shapes of all the neighborhoods and a text underneath. And this physical thing, which we've actually brought out into the city to do the engagement process, it's a physical thing that invites people to literally play with their city. And for us, is really, it functions as a kind of conversation starter. So listening is really important to us, and trying to suspend judgment as long as possible to acquire the kind of local knowledge that's out there. In order to engage in that context in a meaningful way. So we want to understand the people and the forces that act upon architecture in order to understand our own abilities to act, and ultimately to define the clients and the causes that we want to work for. So, for example, this is a project called Rest Stop. It's a little park on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's along the East River. And it's here where we connected many of the great community organizations that are already working in that part of the city. And we made a park out of almost nothing, out of an almost, the budget was almost non-existent, by solely tying into existing material streams. So, such as discarded scaffolding lumber, this kind of structure that you put outside of a building when it's being built. We just used piles of that to make our planters. We took trees that were on their way to being planted in the adjacent public housing projects. We used them in our project, and we used free mulch from the Parks Department. And so here you can see how we used that scaffolding lumber, which we got for free, recycled it, and then reconfigured it into these tree planter plus bench elements. And the trees themselves were maintained by interns by the Lower East Side Ecology Center, who is actually using this site as a training site for tree care. And so here you can see one of those training sessions. So on the one hand, we were creating a place to hang out in this part of the city that's so short of those kinds of spaces, but also at the same time creating an artifact that speaks to the process, the planter bench. It speaks to the process of the kind of deal making that went into this project. Here, this is a temporary outdoor living room that we did at the U.S. Pavilion in Venice, where the curators had asked us to design a space that, one, would improve access to the pavilion itself, but also create a space for programs and lectures, but that would be flexible enough to accommodate different size groups and presentation formats, and really create this kind of outdoor living room with a focus on attracting an underserved Biennale visitor group, that's namely kids. So for the duration of the Biennale, we borrowed these passerelle from the city of Venice. These are these pieces of portable infrastructure that you can see sitting around Venice that are can be easily deployed during Acqua Alta when the water rises. And in exchange for them, we designed and manufactured these cubes that were then donated to the city playgrounds at the end of the project. So here you can see some images. So at the top, that was the project during the Biennale, and then below the project after the Biennale. And here, this diagram too is really sort of talking about the present in the top part of the drawing, and the future in these circles below. So the piece itself is designed as this kind of artifact that in its form gives a hint of the story, the deal, the exchange that made it possible. And here's a slightly different example, Lent Space, which was a 3-year public art space in Tribeca. The owners of this piece of land, they're eventually going to build this huge luxury condo tower on this site, but for a number of complicated reasons, it hasn't gotten built yet. And so in the meantime, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council borrowed the site for exhibitions, and they asked us to help come up with programming and design. And the project consists of 3 basic elements: a central open space for arts and events, which you can sort of see here. There is a collection of planters up over there, and then a fence that is here. So here's that open, these are sort of their little nooks for art pieces. There's the tree nursery with all the plant material in boxes so that it can be moved around easily. And then there's this, the fence. And the fence was really the result of the owner of the site insisting that we fence off the whole site. And that was done for insurance reasons. And our client, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, they didn't want to fence off this public this art space. And so after fighting the fence for a while, we decided to really make it the main component of the project and really design a cool fence, one that would be rotatable and therefore be permeable and active as a center of activity rather than a border. And then these diagrams show the flexibility in the fence. When it's closed, it's really operating kind of like almost like a building facade. And then on the everyday one, a few of them could be pivoted open, here and there to create these shortcuts through the park that facilitate people's day-to-day routines. And then when it's totally open, the space between the fence elements, it serves a little bit, works a little bit like a kind of loggia. We added this kind of Corbusian band window because somebody, who will remain unnamed, had this really absurd security concern about a fully closed fence. They thought it was too blank. We said, okay, great, let's cut a window into it, and while we're at it, let's add this little bench, which you can see here. And so in addition to being a fence, it could be transformed into all sorts of these different conversation pieces. And so, in a way, the physical form speaks to the contention and the compromise that is always part of a development and design process. And the result is somewhat ambiguous, right? You don't know, is this a fence? Is it a bench? Is it a piece of art? Which I think in the end makes it more public too. And we thought this was a design that, and the way that we thought about it and the way that we designed it, we thought that it could be appropriated in many, many different ways. We had no idea that in the end it would be transformed into a barricade during the Occupy Wall Street movement, which I think is like a perfect coda to this project. So I'd like to close with a project where a lot of these things come together. It's called Holding Pattern. It's a project we did in 2011 for MoMA PS1. The Museum of Modern Art every year commissions an architecture firm to design and build the setting for a series of performances that attract about 6,000 people to the PS1 Courtyard every weekend, every Saturday during the summer months. So it's a temporary project. And the question about temporary projects is always, what happens to all this fancy stuff after the project is over? Does it get thrown out? And the second question is, could we design and build something that could be put to a different use once the project was over? So we started the project just by hanging out in the neighborhood and talking to people. And one of the first people that we talked to is a person who runs a cab company right across the street from MoMA. And cab drivers wait there for the start of their shifts. And then to make the wait a little nicer, they built this little plaza you see here with the plastic chairs and tables and a shade awning and a few planters. We thought this was a really interesting space. And looking at it carefully, we realized that some of the programmatic requirements of the MoMA PS1 project, which was to create some shade and to create some seating, they actually match up and align with some of the needs of MoMA PS1's neighbors. So we just started asking all of MoMA PS1's neighbors, is there anything that you need that we could design, build, or buy, use in the PS1 Courtyard over the summer, and then give to you in the fall once the project was over? So this is what we did. So like I said, we talked to the cab drivers, we talked to students, we talked to seniors, we talked to kids, we talked to the Teamsters. The Teamsters are a labor union in the United States. We talked to a ballet teacher. And then we built or bought the things that these people requested. Lifeguard stands, picnic tables, benches, chess tables, and trees, a lot of trees. And then here is every space that where the objects went to in the fall. And here's a map of everything of where it goes, all over the borough of Queens in New York City. But before everything was delivered, it was stored in the courtyard for the summer, and creating a setting for these performances under this kind of column-free shade structure that was created by simply connecting the edges of the courtyard. We wanted to make a form out of the odd shape that we found. So here you can see the courtyard with its odd shape. We strung these ropes across it to create a supporting structure for the shades. There was this neighborhood parcel that owned by someone else, so we couldn't cover that, so we pinched it in right there at that choke point, resulting in this shape, this kind of hyperboloid surface that's directly developed out of what we found, out of the architectural conditions that border the courtyard. So, as I mentioned, a lot of people actually requested trees. So we got about 100 trees arranged here in this kind of temporary forest in one of the parts of the courtyard. Go through these quickly since I'm running out of time. Each tree had a tag, and it said where the tree would go after the summer, namely to places like this, the Teamsters across the street. You remember Ozzy? He asked for some trees. Well, there's the tree being planted. Long Island School of Ballet, they asked for some mirrors. They were expanding their school. So we got mirrors, and we put them in this smaller courtyard in this kind of, you could say, pseudo post-minimalist installation. It happened to be a very popular spot during the party. It was like this kind of hall of mirrors that everybody wanted to get there, do a selfie. The ballet school came to visit and did a couple of performances there over the summer. Here's the program. And then here you can see the mirrors installed in their new home. So instead of working for one client, the Museum of Modern Art, we started working for about 50 different clients in Long Island City. And so underneath, there was this collection of items, what Barry Bergdahl had called the public rec room. Flip through these, there's the lifeguard stand, stools. See that ping pong table? That was requested by the taxi drivers across the street. There it is, the ping pong table right after it was delivered across the street to its new home. Foosball table over the summer in the courtyard, and in the fall, the foosball table at the Jacob Riis Settlement House. Rock climbing wall over the summer in the courtyard, rock climbing wall at the neighborhood gym. Chess table over the summer in the courtyard, and in the fall at the local senior center. So while at the museum, each one of these pieces was labeled and explained, this was a museum after all. And we created this little newspaper that told the stories of our adopted clients. So while the project started out with a clearly defined site, a schedule, and a client, we expanded the site beyond the walls of the museum. We expanded the schedule beyond the summer, and we expanded the client from 1 to over 50. Matching the needs of the event with some of the ideas and the desires and the needs present in the neighborhood. So this was a really interesting space of interaction between these different publics. The warm-up crowd, the summer hipsters in seeking out a party, the contemporary art enthusiasts, but then also the people that had never set foot in the museum, who came to visit their stuff, their tree, their sandbox. And people also came because we organized many events with our community partners. We invited the people and organizations that we worked with to make use of the courtyard for programs of their own during the summer months. And they included things like quilt making workshops with the New York Irish Center, bike repair workshops, reading for kids with the Queens Public Library, and b-boy workshops with 5 Points. You can see their building in the background. This was an aerosol art center. And 5 Points, at their event that they organized, they decided to do an aerosol art workshop, and they showed some examples of their aerosol art in the museum courtyard. And I promise you, this was the first and only aerosol art exhibition that ever happened at the Museum of Modern Art of this type. And I would say really creating an interesting dialogue here between two publics and two discourses, and at least temporarily turning this museum courtyard into a radically public space. Thank you.
The idea is that you can actually ask directly questions after the talks, because we have made the experience, and you probably too, if you wait for that until the end of the day, you've forgotten it and you're tired. So, we have microphones for you. Please, just whenever you have one, raise your hand. I can warm up. Here's one. Anne. No.
Why is it 157?
We used to have
the number of the
100,
tools.
Yeah. Yes, it was 101, and we just couldn't help ourselves.
All right. Another one? Here's one.
How do you get paid for your work and have the money run?
We do get paid for our work. We don't get paid a lot, and sometimes we do work for free when we find clients that we want to work for, that we feel it's meaningful. But I think what we're doing is we will get our, like for example, MoMA paid us, or our planning clients, they pay us. We get small fees for almost all of our projects. But what I wanted to, in highlighting these particular projects, I wanted to show how we try to sort of make more with what we have, and in a way kind of like double our money. So in a sense, like with the MoMA PS1 project, we got our fee for the project, but in a way, we doubled that money by giving the results of it to somebody else. And so trying to make more with what we have.
I think that was a really interesting question, because I had actually also thought the same. What is the economical constituency to actually allow you to actually take care of this kind of curation of public life? And interestingly enough, in the past, you would say a lot of the things that you do would have been in the responsibility and in the interest of municipalities to take care of, to really think about what want people from public space, what do they need, what kind of infrastructure. Now we know that the US has been an ardent supporter of the neoliberal understanding of society, which, as to quote Margaret Thatcher, is summed up by her famous statement, "There is no such thing as society." You remember, maybe? So a lot of the past 2 or 3 decades have been about dismantling the government infrastructure that could actually take care of that kind of sort of care of the public. Do you see that there's something changing in the US now? Because we've seen this for so long. We've seen the disadvantages. We've seen communities eroding because there is no one actually taking care of it in the interest of the public hand. Is this becoming worse and worse? Or do you see that there's politicians and government bodies in the US that actually understand that this is actually bad for society and try to steer against it?
Well, that's a very challenging question to answer. I do see that a lot of the work that we've done with institutions is fitting into that context in which, say the public goodies or the public spaces that historically would have been owned and operated by the local government have been. The governments are no longer doing that, and so in the United States, what we find is that a lot of institutions and philanthropic organizations are filling in the gap, and so I think that that's one of the reasons why we do a lot of work with museums and other institutions. It's certainly not enough, but I think that one of the things that we're trying to do with our work is to make visible those forces, because I think a lot of times everyday people don't necessarily, they're so busy sort of living their lives that they don't understand that the erosion of, say, public space or public services is, say in the United States, related to people's insistence that their local politicians always keep their taxes low. I mean, so there's these large structural things that people are not aware of. And so I think with our projects and other work that we've done, we try to make those forces visible. Do I see things changing? Well, I mean, I think it's obvious that in the US right now, we're in a state of extreme crisis. I have no idea what's going to happen, on November 8th. And I think that crisis is really a reflection of the fact that people are generally unhappy with the status quo, that they know that government is not working for them. But I think that we live in such a segregated society, both spatially and intellectually. People are clustered in sort of like-minded groups, that I think that people, even with all the debate that we currently have around the election, don't necessarily understand, why we're missing certain things. And I think that that's something that's not specific to New York. Look at what happened with the Brexit. People voted for something that they didn't even realize that they were voting for because the politicians said it was something else.
And they Googled too late.
Yes, yes. But so I think that, at least in places like New York, Anna and I were just talking before, one of the other speakers, about, say, the context of housing in New York City. There are places where government officials have been voted in, where there's a new agenda about, say, trying to balance some of the inequities that exist there. So there's an interest in producing more public housing in New York City now, not public housing, but affordable housing. And I think right now, like a lot of the projects that we're getting, like for example with the city of Cambridge, we're doing these big planning projects which reflect a commitment on the part of local governments of at least participatory spending, and I think that that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for your work. Keep on doing it, and thanks for a great talk.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.